Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here today at this webinar on the EFSA call for tender environmental neurotoxicants with reference OC EFSA PREV 2023-01. My name is Marco Cortopassi from the EFSA Finance Unit, and I'm here today with my colleague Andrea Terron and Iris Mangas from the EFSA PREV Unit, who will shortly present to you the opportunity of the scientific collaboration offered with this call for tender. The objective of this webinar is to provide to potential tenders an overview on the call on environmental neurotoxicants, which was launched on the 7th of April. And this webinar will focus primarily on the scientific content of the tender. After my opening remarks, my colleagues from the PREV unit will give you a presentation on the background of the call, its structure in terms of objective, tasks, and deliverables, and the criteria, the main criteria to be able to apply. And finally, some remarks on my side to conclude the webinar, which we expect will not last more than 45 minutes. Before we start, I would like to share with you some housekeeping points about the event. You are automatically connected to an audio broadcast, and it's going to be a one-way oral communication, so you will be a participant in listening mode. The event is going to be recorded, and the recording will be made available on the EFSA website and on the TED e-tendering portal, along with the call for tender documents. But during the event, the question box is enabled, so you can submit questions throughout the webinar via the dedicated Q&A chat. You should be able to see that on the right-hand side of the screen. The webinar is in English, so please write your questions in English using the chat box. Your questions will be collected and will be answered in writing afterwards, after the event, and they will be published on the TED e-tendering platform on the Q&A section. After the event, participants, of course, can continue to send their questions as usual for all EFSA tenders using the Q&A section of the TED e-tendering portal. Finally, after the event, participants will receive a link to a survey to evaluate the event, and please take the time to provide your feedback. It is useful for us to be able to improve events of this kind for the future. And now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Iris. Please, Iris, call it yours.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Iris Mangas, a scientific officer of the Pesticides Peer Review Unit, and I will provide you some of the details of the tender recently published. I will present the background, the objectives, and some of the specificities of Lot 1 and Lot 2 on tasks, deliverables, and selection and our criteria. Then I will give the floor to my colleague Andrea Terron to present Lot 3 and Lot 4. May I have, thank you. So, of course, this has a legislative framework and a legislative final aim. Hazards associated with neurotoxicity and developmental neurotoxicity are of core of interest for the risk assessment of chemical substance, and in particular for the risk assessment of pesticides active substance. Both neurotoxicity and developmental neurotoxicity studies, when triggered, are part of the pesticides regulation and data requirements. Neurotoxicity, in addition, is taken into account to categorize active substance. So a pesticide active substance should not be considered of low risk or of basic substance where there are neurotoxic effects. And in addition, should be approved as a candidate for substitution when there are reasons of concern for developmental neurotoxicity. However, a specific current neurotoxicity and developmental neurotoxicity in vivo OECD test guidelines studies are only triggered based on observed neurotoxic effects in repeated dose testing or of non-neurotoxicity mode of action of the active substance, or because you have a structure activity alert. However, we know that the toxic effects resulting from chemical exposure can interact with other risk factors such as prenatal stress, and persistence of some of these chemicals in the brain over time may result in cumulative toxicity. In addition, early life exposure to chemicals can have permanent consequences for neurodevelopmental and for neurodegeneration in later life. Recent scientific advance using in vitro neuronal models combined with high-throughput technology has fostered the recent development of several assays that could rapidly screen chemicals and could contribute to neurotoxicity and developmental neurotoxicity risk assessment. In addition, EFSA in the last year has engaged with the scientific community for the development and also the implementation of these new approach methodologies that could contribute to the neurotoxicity and developmental neurotoxicity risk assessment in a cost and time-effective manner. So the main objective of this call is that, indeed, to contribute to the development and regulatory implementation of these new approach methodologies for developmental neurotoxicity and neurotoxicity testing. It has a maximum budget allocated of 3.5 million, and it has divided in 4 different objectives, and each of these objectives has been classified in different lots. So we have that lot 1 and objective 1, lot 2 and objective 2, and lot 4 and objective 4 are related to developmental neurotoxicity. Lot 3 is related to neurotoxicity. Of course, all of them covers the development of the system, the prioritization of chemicals, and the production of regulatory case studies. Lot 1 is based on the generation of data, generation of pesticides data using the developmental neurotoxicity in vitro battery, as published in the OECD draft guidance. The lot 2 is to produce the transferability data for the assays in that developmental neurotoxicity in vitro battery, and it has a maximum budget of $500,000. The lot 3 is regarding the development of data of new approach methodologies for neurotoxicity, and it has a budget allocated of maximum 1.5 million. And the lot 4 is regarding the production of AOP in form IATA, regulatory risk assessment case studies for pesticides active substance, and it has a maximum budget allocated of $500,000. It's important to note that a tender can apply to 1 or 2 more lots, but it has to be specified if applies to several lots that technical and financial offerings should be done for the different lots. And also it's important to note that a consortium creation is not only possible, but also very much encouraged by EFSA. Thank you. So here we have some of the specific objectives that has been divided. The lot 1, the generation of pesticides data using the developmental neurotoxicity in vitro battery. Of course, you will find more details in the tender. This pretends to be just a summary of these sub-specific objectives. The first thing that EFSA considers should be done is to map versus the European authorized pesticides active substance what has been tested until now and in which assays. Again, when considering the 17 assays of the developmental neurotoxicity in vitro battery as described in the OECD draft guidance that was actually approved yesterday. Objective 1B is the testing, blinding or not blinding, in the full DNT in vitro battery. Of course, if as a result of the objective 1, some test has been already done, the repetition is not needed and not encouraged by EFSA. It's important to note that at least 100 chemicals should be tested. The objective 1C is to test a limited number of chemicals to reproduce data on true positive and true negative. And it is specified as an example, 3 positive and 3 negative substances should be included for each of the assays. And the last will be to analyze the results of all the assays conducted and of all the chemicals. And it is recommended to use an unified analytical pipeline for data interpretation and also to report the data using a format compatible with TOSCAS database structure that will facilitate the regulatory use of this data. May I have the next slide? Thank you. So that for objectives has been divided in 3 tasks, 3 main tasks that you have here over a period of 3 years that will cover the full project. As you can see here, each of the tasks will be one main deliverable. The first one that it is planned to be deliverable to EFSA at the 2 months after the kickoff will be the detailed study plan. You will also find in the tender specifications all the details that EFSA has drafted that should be included in this protocol or study plan. Main ones is, again, we need a number of 100 chemicals and the identification and rationale for the selection of these chemicals. Then we need positive and negative controls. The description of the test methods should be in line with PREV 2019. And we need the description of how the data will be stored and, of course, a plan for communication with EFSA. The task 2 and the deliverable 2 has been divided in 3, is the testing phase, the generation of the data, and of course is the longest period of the project, from the month 2 to the month 26. So it has been divided of the screening of 10% of the pesticides for the first sub-deliverable, up to 30% of the pesticides for the second one at 12 months, and a screening of the remaining chemicals up to 26 months after the kickoff. The third deliverable will be done between the month 26 and the month 36, that is the end of the project, and will be focused on the reporting of the experimental data with the details of using the same analytical pipeline for analyzing all the data and to do it in a data model that should be suitable for transfer to an international database, an EFSA recommended TOSCAS model. So this is just a short of what is included in the tender specification, how your code is going to be evaluated. So first, we have the main selection criteria, and these are a must, so are requirements in order to evaluate your application. So EFSA requires that the applicant must have an extensive and demonstrable experience in the execution of the in vitro assays in line with GLP or good in vitro method practice. EFSA requires that the team should be composed by one expert, the leader, with at least 10 years of experience in vitro developmental neurotoxicity. In addition, 2 experts with at least 5 years of experience in vitro DNT and or in vitro methodologies. Sorry. And in addition, 2 experts with at least 2 years of experience in vitro methodologies and 1 expert with at least 2 years of experience in computational toxicology. Of course, at the organization level, they must provide that they have access to the appropriate test system and technical equipment necessary for the execution of the DNT in vitro battery, and this will include the analytical assessment. If this is fulfilled, your application will be evaluated regarding 3 main quality criteria. The first, methodology proposed for the implementation with a maximum of 50 points. Then the project organization with a maximum of 30 points, and the risk management of the project with a maximum of 20 points. Of course, it has also the criteria of best price-quality ratio as applied by EFSA. Regarding lot 2, the main objective is the transferability of the developmental neurotoxicity in vitro battery assays, and it has been divided in 4 sub-objectives. The first one is the optimization of the assays and the drafting of the SOPs. The second one is the transfer of these optimized SOPs for the developmental neurotoxicity in vitro battery to another naive laboratory or laboratories. The third one is the testing a limited number of chemicals to reproduce data on true positive and true negative for each of the assays. And of course, the rationale for selection of these chemicals should be given. And the last is the testing, blinded or not blinding, of an adequate number of expected hit and not hit substance once the assays has been transferred. So that 4 objectives has been again divided in 3 main deliverables and 3 main tasks. The first one, again, is the study plan that should cover all the assays in the DNT in vitro battery, and this is the key word. And you will find also all the details in line with the previous one that are needed for EFSA for the study plan. The study plan is thought to be provided to EFSA at the 3rd month. And after that, we will have a meeting. And then in the task 2, which is the optimization of the assays, a report of the SOPs of the preliminary transferability of the assays is expected to be sent to EFSA by the 15th month. And finally, but not least, is the main part of the project that would be from the 15th month to the end of the project, 3 years. That will be the testing and transfer and the production of a transferability report in line with the success criteria as defined in the protocol. So here again, we have the selection and our criteria for the lot 2. It is very much in line with the selection and our criteria needed for lot 1 because of the aim of this part of the project. And again, the selection criteria are a must, and only if the applicant meets that criteria, the application will be assessed. So the applicant must have an extensive and demonstrable experience in the execution of the in vitro assays, in line with the good in vitro method practice, so in line with GLP or the given criteria. It has to provide a team with an expert of 10 years of experience in vitro DNT, 3 experts with at least 5 years of experience in vitro DNT and or in vitro methodologies, including experience following GLP or good in vitro method practice. And the organization must have access to the appropriate test system and the technical equipment necessary for the transferability of the DNT in vitro battery. And this again includes the analytical assessment. How the application will be evaluated in line with the lot 1, it will be evaluated for methodology proposed for implementation with a maximum of 50 points, for project organization with a maximum of 30 points, and for risk management with a max of the project with a maximum of 20 points. And of course, with the best price quality ratio as specified in EFSA formula. And with this, I give the floor to my colleague, Andrea Terron, that will explain lot 3 and 4. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. A word welcome to everybody also from my side. I'm Andrea Terron. I'm also a scientific officer in the PREV unit. Among the different lot, the lot 3 is the one not dealing with DNT, but dealing with neurotoxicity. Basically, is dealing with a mitochondrial toxicity or with cellular respiration, with the aim of testing for neurotoxicity dealing with an adverse outcome compatible with the Parkinson's syndrome. We have also here 4 objectives. The first objective is to generate a robust set of data for pesticides, active substance, for which the pesticide mode of action and the toxicological knowledge suggest disruption of mitochondrial functioning using the AOP number 3 in the AOP wiki as a reference framework. This is the screening phase for which we ask for at least 100 chemicals to be tested, at least for one key event, and this should include mainly pesticide, but we understand that also substances that are outside the domain of pesticide can be included if they are relevant for the mode of action. The objective 3B will be to generate a robust set of data using the testing battery developed to measure key events in the AOP number 3 for pesticide active substance postulated to induce mitochondrial dysfunction. The objective 3C and 3D will be an evolution of the testing strategy, and the 3C will be to determine and, where feasible, the intracellular concentration in at least one experimental system, so one key events, for a selection of active substances to better interpretation of nominal concentration data. This will trigger the objective 3D, that is the development an IOP informed IETA case study that should include a tiered approach for expanding finding from an acute exposure over 1 to 72 hours in vitro to human relevant scenarios of more chronic or intermittent exposure over 1 or 2 weeks in test systems suitable for testing, for example, the brain spheroid, and not including the proposed testing strategy. Overall, with IOP informed IATA is intended to provide a point of departure in an appropriate test system. Next slide, please. As for the lot 1, also this lot is articulated in 5 tasks at different deliverables. The period is 36 months, and the task 1 is provide to EFSA the detailed study plan, and the task 2 is the screening phase. The screening phase, because we are asking for many chemicals to be tested, is staggered into steps. The first step is included 30% of the pesticide active substances that are expected to be tested for at least one key event. The task 3 and 4 will include the experimental data that are including objective 3B, so the testing in the along the full battery, and the outcome of the intracellular concentration for pesticides including the study plan. The final report will include the outcome of the screening of the intracellular concentration and the IATA case study, using the intracellular concentration for at least one test system as a point of departure. Next slide, please. As already explained a couple of times by Iris, also here we have selection and award criteria. The main selection criteria are very, very similar to the one which are applicable for the lot 1, but in terms the difference is that in this case the in vitro experience should be mainly focused on neurotoxicity rather than on developmental neurotoxicity. So in terms of professional capacity, it should be demonstrated an extensive and demonstrable experience in the execution on in vitro assay in line with a good in vitro method practice like GLP or GVIMP. The one expert should have at least 10 years of experience on in vitro neurotoxicology, and 2 experts should have at least 5 years in experimental in vitro neurotoxicology and or in vitro methodology. Again, also for this lot, is relevant to underline that at least for one expert is requested at least 2 years of experience in computational toxicologies, because we like to have the data in a format that is exportable, possible to ToxCast. And also in terms of technical capacity, it must have access to the appropriate test system and technical equipment necessary for the execution of the battery of assay, as as described in objective and as described in the OP3. This should also include an analytical assessment for determination of cellular biokinetic, and this should be and the availability of the methodology for the analytical assessment should be included in the proposal. In terms of our criteria, again, as already expressed by my colleagues, we will evaluate the methodology proposal for implementation for a maximum of 50 points, the project organization for a maximum of 30 points, and the risk management for a maximum of 20 points. With this, you can move to the next slide. This is the lot 4 and is produced collaborative IOP informal IATA for DNT risk assessment of pesticide active substances. In this case, the lot doesn't include a screening phase or a testing strategy, but testing is not excluded. The objective 4 is to conduct an IOP informal IATA case study based on a DNT risk assessment problem formulation for at least 4 pesticide active substances as target chemicals. A priority will be given to proposals that address a risk characterization problem formulation by including the IATA exposure consideration through reverse dosimetry or PBK models. The pesticide active substance should be selected from EFSA list of chemicals, and in the tender specification you have a series of documents on which you can rely on to where the list of chemicals where EFSA tested the pesticide for in vitro DNT are reported. At least one should be one of the case studies should be selected where we have DNT positive in vitro, a DNT negative in vivo, and the other one the other way around. So you should have DNT positive in vivo and DNT negative in vitro. The initial concordant analysis and list of chemical substances has been done by EFSA using public available data and will be provided to the contractor, including the result of the DNT OECD test guidance 426 and for the result of the DNT in vitro battery. The development of the IATA should take into consideration the OECD guidance document that was actually approved yesterday by the WNT group at the OECD level on the evaluation data for the DNT-IVB and the tier testing strategy. If they are not publicly available, you can refer to EFSA and we will provide these. A list of documents to be consulted is listed in the tender specification of the document, but under request we can definitely provide the exhaustive list. Next slide, please. Also, this lot is articulated in 5 tasks and deliverable. So the first one is very important and is the opinion informed IATA workflow that will include the protocol and the 4 IATA case studies. The second task will include the systematic literature review. The result of the systematic literature review should include the inclusion and exclusion criteria and the critical appraisal of the evidence results. Again, in the tender specification, you have the list of the references that you can use as example of what do you mean by systematic literature review, inclusion, exclusion criteria, and appraisal. The task 3 is the evidence synthesis. So the preliminary report should summarize the body of evidence included in the OP informed IATA and structured uncertainty analysis, considering the regulatory problem formulation. As for the task 2, in the tender specification, you have the list to which you can refer of examples where EFSA reported a structured uncertainty analysis. The task 4 is the one including the experimental work. This experimental work can be ADME work depending on the case study, or a PBK modeling, or a specific development of an extrapolation model. The final report is the report of the IATA following the OECD template and guidance, and also all these documents are available. Next slide, please. In this case, the professional capacity is not dealing with the laboratory capacity, but the tender overall must have an extensive and demonstrable experience in human health regulatory toxicology. For example, chemical risk assessment or pesticide risk assessment. It should provide ability in one expert at least 10-year experience in regulatory toxicologies, and one expert should have at least 5 years of experience in systematic and literary review and experience, and the other expert at least 5 years in regulatory toxicology. Two experts should have at least 3 years of experience in vitro toxicology, because indeed this DNT IOP informed IATA is intended to make use of the DNT in vitro battery. The technical capacity, the tender must have access to the appropriate toxicology database for the systematic literature review. As already said, we will evaluate these, and the award criteria will be the methodology proposal for implementation 50 points, project organization 30 points, and risk management 20 points. Then there will be, of course, in line with the EFSA guidance, the best price quality ratio that you have the formula in the tender specification. This is my last slide. You can move to the next, and I pass the floor back to my colleague Marco.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much, Iris, for the presentation of the call. We are heading to the conclusion of the webinar. Actually, we're faster than expected. I can see in the chat box that we have some questions that our participants have submitted. Thanks very much for that. As I mentioned earlier, now we will collect those questions, analyze in details, and we will respond in writing, and we will publish the responses on the e-tendering platform in the Q&A section. Of course, any further question that you didn't have a chance to ask today live during the presentation, that you come up during the studying of the tender documents in the coming days and weeks, you will be able to ask at any time using, again, the TED e-tendering platform. In the Q&A section there, you will have a tab to create a question, and I invite you to do so. As mentioned earlier, the webinar has been recorded, and now the recording and the slides as well will be published on the EFSA website and in the TED e-tendering as well, alongside the call tender document, so the tender specifications and the annexes. And with this, I think I would like to thank you again, the speakers, and thank you very much the participants for taking the time to listen to us today, and wish you good luck with your tender in case you decide to apply. Thank you.